welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. As you can see, I'm here alone. My name's Alexander, and we're looking at a solitaire wargame today. And this is one of my personal grail games, so to speak. And today we're able to look at Where There Is Discord. And this is by Fifth Column Games. It is designed by a gentleman called Daniel Hodges, and it's a grail game. First off, it was expensive in the first place, but the company went under, and the game's no longer in print, so it's even more expensive on the secondhand market. But I was lucky enough to find a gentleman who wanted to trade, so I was able to get my hands on a copy, which I was very, very excited for. I wanted to play this for a long time because people said it was so good, and it was a solitaire war game. And the theme of this game is the Falklands War in the South Atlantic, which I can understand there's a fairly niche market for that kind of a themed game, I feel. And maybe that's why the game's more expensive, because it was a premium product and they knew they wouldn't sell volume of units, so they had to make their money back with making a good product and putting a price on that. But here we are. I've just finished my first ever playthrough, and I'll say probably from start to finish, this probably took 6 to 8 hours, give or take. I had to learn the game, and I had a lot of referencing the rule book, which is, if you've played this game, you know that's somewhat more of a task than it normally is with most games. The rulebook's not that great, hasn't been updated since the first edition many years ago. And so I had a very, very useful, 14 billion page kind of condensed sequence of play with explanations from the rulebook that was all reordered, that was extremely helpful, and I basically used that to just almost like as a flip chart to go through and play the game. That was very, very, very helpful. So if you do play this, I'd recommend going on Board Game Geek. You can find all that stuff on there in the files section. That makes this game much more enjoyable and much more fun to play than having to dive through the rulebook, which at times is organized in kind of an odd way, and it's very, very, very dense in its text. So, what is this game even about? So, this is the game set in 1982, and what happened was the Argentinians laid sovereign claim to what was then a British territory called the Falkland Islands, and the Argentinians referred to them as the Maldives, I believe, or the Malvinas? Maldives, is it? The Maldivas. Yes, okay. And basically they marched right in and took the island without all that much resistance, because it's only a tiny island, basically a rock in the middle of the South Atlantic off of the Argentinian coast, and there's a few thousand British citizens lived there, and they just came in and took it over, because from a colonial standpoint we'd taken it and laid claim to it however many years prior to that. So obviously that's very that was an unpleasant time, and very it was an act of war. And so Margaret Thatcher, who was the British PM at the time, she mobilized the military and set out a naval task force with 2 Sea Harrier aircraft carriers, as well as a few thousand troops, to go and take them back. And whilst the Falklands, again, it's a tiny rock, there's a lot of political, questioning that goes around the motive of the war, but basically, for me, it was a very opportune time for the PM to consolidate her power by having a military show of force that was in no way. They weren't the aggressors in that war, so it was great. You were able to curry national favor by taking back what was taken from you, and in doing so, kind of polarize the country in your favor. Because the Falklands themselves have really not all that much strategic significance, or even any particular natural resources, although they've been trying to find oil in the seas around the Falklands for years. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background of this war, and I say war, I mean it was a war, But it only lasted for a few months. By the time the Naval Task Force got down there, the Argentinians, don't have the most prestigious armed forces, and so what happened was that the British were able to come defend their fleet whilst they sailed down, and they were able to take the island back. But they suffered heavy casualties, and there's a lot of tragedy that surrounds this tiny rock in the South Atlantic, but also a lot of bravery and heroism from those who were called up to fight. So how does this game play, and what is it like? That's the real question. Okay, this is expensive, and you want to know that you get your money's worth. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at kind of some of the board elements here. We'll go close up on the board and talk about some of that, although a lot of it's a bit, kind of out there already. But you have a task force display where you put all your Royal Navy boats, and then you have a number of Sea Harrier counters that you put out on patrols to support those and to intercept wave after wave of incoming Argentinian sorties that come from the mainland. They're just trying to kill the boats, and in doing so, kill the troops who are on the boats, and make the landing force on the Falklands significantly weaker, so they'd be able to repel them. That's the gist of it. There's some world opinion and domestic opinion, political stuff you got to keep a track of, and there's kind of some submarine warfare going on. But really, it's this almost not quite tower defense, but you're just trying to survive wave after wave. And a lot of solitaire games do that. And this reminded me at times of John Butterfield's RAF, where it's just, where are they going to attack? I put up my forces, hope for the best, and then they come, and obviously they come where you didn't put your forces, and you get attacked, and you have this combat resolution in a number of steps that's actually quite interesting at times. If not, it's a solo game, so there's some dice chucking, so there's some randomness in it. But what we'll do is we'll take a look here at all the different bits and pieces of what you get in this actually very large, as you can see, game. Okay, so this is about as much of the board as I could fit in, and we'll take a look at some of the corners here in just a second. But as you can see, this is the southern. It's Argentina, so it's the southern peninsula of South America, and you've got the Falklands just over here, kind of abstractly, just kind of on the board. And what you have is, in this bottom corner, we'll take a look here. This is basically the landing sites. So you actually don't play tactically on the island as such. You've just got some beachhead that you take care of down here. A lot of the action will take place in your task force here. So you've got a central zone where you've got to have your carriers and some supply ships to keep protected, and you've got picket zones in compass points, and then you've got this defense zone, which is like an extra zone on the edge that you'll use to defend waves of fighters or naval vessels that are trying to kind of attack the task force. So part of the game is getting good deployment, which early in the game you really don't have many vessels, and so your task force kind of seems very static. But as the game progresses, you'll see up here, every time you have the Royal Navy ensign, you'll be putting out reinforcements. You get more and more as more ships join the task force, so there becomes a bit more strategy in where you put ships and which types of ships you put together, and we'll take a little bit closer look at why the configuration of ships matters here in just a second. But that's the majority of where the action happens. Again, a lot of this board is almost extraneous. It's just a placeholder, geographically, for these air bases that launch these fighters, and they come and attack you. So the board's big and beautiful, but it's just, a lot of it is for looks, a lot of it's holding boxes. And the board it's two huge mounted map boards, and the game could be half the size and still be very nice and playable, but they made it huge just to kind of, I don't know, give you that big grand feeling, I guess. But I really liked it. I thought it was cool looking on the table. What we'll do is we'll take a look down here. This is the war opinion display, and what you have is you have domestic opinion and international opinion, and these, they do what they say on the tin, right? So you have an opinion track. 10 means the whole country is behind you, and 0 means the country's totally lost faith in your governance, and it's been a disaster from opinion point, and you immediately lose the game if your domestic opinion plummets to 0. The international opinion, it's a lot of the same kind of idea, right? A lot of the events, and we'll talk about these here in just a second, affect that. Bad things happen abroad, or you were maybe too aggressive in the eyes of international affairs. So this will go down or up, and as this goes down, you lose the support of the Chileans. The Soviets pull their satellite support. You lose. There's an arms embargo gets lifted. You lose the capacity for NATO supplied AIM missiles, Sidewinders, and then if this plummets to 0, the U.S. pulls their support, and you lose the capacity to have early warning from their Nimrod aircraft that was supporting the task force. So if you're piddling around down here with support, things have gone very bad for you. So we're trying to avoid that and keep these up as much as possible to get all these bonuses and keep us, in good standing with all the people back home and abroad as well. Outside of that, we've got this combat display, which we'll talk a little bit about, but the combat display is, I don't know, I barely used it, because you almost don't need to half the time. It's just a case of, if it's airplanes, enemy aircraft will fly at you, and if you get a target lock, okay, we got a target lock with a 7, and this guy got a target lock with an 11, because it's based on die rolls, you just line those up. They got a whole full display for that, but the reality is I don't know if I ever actually used it properly, because half the time you don't even need it. The Argentinians have some naval units. What they have, we'll take a look here. They have a fair number. They have a couple of subunits here. Let's see. We have the San Luis and the Santa Fe. These subunits, and they'll be coming out of port, going on patrols in these 3 different abstracted zones. And then they also have surface fleets, but these come out less often because the Argentinians were historically more conservative with their surface groups because they're much very valuable. But those will come into these naval boxes. The British have these subs, and their own subs will be intercepting. And you'll have sub-to-sub combat, which is, I don't know if any subs were sunk or hit on either side throughout the entire game. And, they'll fire on the surface units, and a lot of the time the surface units get scared and kind of run away. Again, going back to that very conservative doctrine that they were given. But if the Argentinian naval units kind of survive, don't get detected, if they spot the task force group, which a lot of it is kind of rolling a dice based on which box you're in, they have the opportunity to kind of infiltrate the task force and go for a full attack. Now, these units, I've got 3 ships in the defense zone. Each one of them rolls a d6 to try and spot the Argentinians infiltrating, and then they'll ward them off. 1 wards them off. If they don't, then the Argentinians roll a d12. Oh, they roll 2d6. Sorry, 2d6. Oh, look, they're going to space 7. This is where they're going to attack. When the good news is I got a bunch of ships here. And I got a couple of carriers that I put on combat air patrol. And so then you juke it out. And, it depends what's going on, but you've got, let's see, if it was a sub, the sub's going to try and attack, the British are going to try and defend, and if nothing happens, nothing happens, and I felt like that happened quite a lot. It was a lot of kind of posturing and kind of juking around, and then, the Argentinians would withdraw, or, if hits were scored, boats would sink. That would affect public opinion. If the British lose lots of vessels, the domestic opinion plummets as they take heavy casualties. Or it can even, if no vessels are sunk, you have rule of engagement checks where, the British don't want to be seen as the aggressors necessarily, So they have a hard time. They'll fire the first shot less often, but once the first boat is sunk, it's, all hands on deck. You never have to make that rule of engagement check again. So there's a lot of different bits and pieces that go into this, but you're trying to guess where the most likely places for an attack would occur, which are kind of marked in with these dots. So 7 and 9 on a 2d6, it's going to come out far more often. So I had a bunch of boats stacked there, and I would often have 1 or 2 Harriers on air patrol as well. But then over in box 2, I had a couple troop carriers and 1 boat, because I'm like, the likelihood of rolling snake eyes is very low, and the gamble paid off, so I could commit more forces to the western side of the task force than I could the eastern side. So that was, there's some risk reward there, but it paid off. I actually lost very few boats to combat. I maybe lost 1 in the whole of the campaign, and ironically, I had 3 or 4 boats removed from the game, but that was through events. Like, we supplied the Chileans with the warship, so one of my reinforcements went away, and then I think something to do with the US. There was a US event that took a couple of my future reinforcements away, so I had fewer coming in, but I think I lost 1 boat from the actual task force throughout the campaign. So that's a lot of the combat. A lot of it I felt was the naval combat, because as far as the air goes, you have these the sitrep cards, and these will flip 1 every turn unless an event states otherwise. And basically, you go through the whole deck until you get to Operation Sutton, which means you can invade the Falklands. Retake the Falklands and launch the landing attacks. But each one of these has this air value, which in the early game is 5, 5, or no, that's the late game ones. 2, 2, 3, 3, 4. They're just very low, this red value here, and you roll a d10. Oh look, I rolled a 7. If that's equal to or greater than that air value, no sorties are launched against you. So you also get a modifier to that based on weather. So if it's foggy, they're less likely to launch sorties against you. And really, for the first 2 weeks, I don't know if I had a single sortie launched against me. And then really it took almost until 2 days before Operation Sutton, so kind of around the 19th and 20th, was when those numbers really started to ramp up, and it was much more likely. Then I started getting a lot of air attacks, which I'd have to defend against. But having those on a die roll meant, that's the randomness element to it. But it meant that I was able to avoid a lot of air attacks, and these guys, they'll shoot down your Harriers if they can, if you don't shoot them down, and then they go on bombing runs against boats in each zone that they kind of target. So there's a lot of that going on. But I felt like there was less than I was expecting. I was expecting this to be much more of the game. And maybe that's just my luck, right? Maybe I just rolled really well, and the Argentinian Air Force stood down for 2.5 weeks straight. And that was great for me. It meant the game went very quickly, because I wasn't doing a lot in that sub-phase. And it also meant I preserved all my forces, so that was nice. And there's some structure to how all that works. But I don't know if I was disappointed. I was almost relieved that I wasn't getting bombarded on all fronts. But in my brain, I thought there'd be a bit more of that. I didn't, for example, incur a single Exocet missile in the whole campaign. And I know that there was a few that were launched, and even they start with 5, and the stock, they ended up with 8, but they never, the roll, the Super Étendard that shoots those, that launches the Exocets, they never came up. They never launched sorties, because again, that's all decided on a die roll based on that sitrep card. So again, go back to the sitrep card. If sorties are launched, so that's a die roll, yes or no. If it's yes, then you roll a d10, and they launch from whichever airbase. So for the Exocet missiles to have a chance to be launched, they go on from Rio Grande, 2 or 3 on a d10. So it was very, I don't know. I was scared of the exocets, but they never came up. So I feel like I want to play this again just to try and play with all those elements and get them to see what they do almost. Yeah, I feel there were some moving parts that I just didn't come up because everything's kind of decided by those die rolls. And the die rolls determine, which naval units come out and where they go and all that stuff. And die rolls determine all your targeting rolls, as the ships have radar locks. Then they have targeting rolls, and then they launch their surface-to-air missiles to shoot Argentinian planes down. And everything's a die roll, and almost everything is hits on a 1. Wow, I wish I'd had that earlier. And so there is that randomness to it, and I do wish that there was some sort of maybe a combat results chart somewhere. I wish there was an odds-based variant somehow where it could be a bit more, I don't know, just a bit less dice chucking-y. Because the dice chucking was fun and I had a good time with it, and every roll you kind of sweating bullets because your precious, precious resources, and they are extremely limited, mean so much. But, do we spot them? Yes or no? Do I shoot them? Yes or no? And so much of it is no. So much of it is nothing happens, or they missed, or we missed, and my subs, man, the subs detect enemy subs on a roll of 1 or more. I would roll so badly the whole game. My subs engaged in combat a single time in 4 weeks. It was crazy. So there is that, and you do have to understand that about this game. There's a lot of kind of dice rolling. There's a lot of different dice, and they provide all those dice for you, and that's very, very nice. The other aspect that's quite random is the event deck. I played the entire campaign way more than I should have because my landings were actually delayed half a week, which was very bad. And I used half the event deck. So I'm going to play this again, and it's going to play wildly differently. So that's nice. There's just all these events. Oh, look at all these favorable events in here that never came up. Whereas I have so many events here that were just a lot of them delayed Operation Sutton, and I took penalties from that as well. So each day after the 21st that Operation Sutton was delayed, domestic opinion would plummet. So I was really hurting on that front. And then some of the events were reconnaissance-based things, so that was cool. You can scout the landings before you do them. But, and we'll take a look here. Okay, I'm just going to move the camera. Down here in the San Carlos display, every day on the 21st and beyond, the Argentinians put out forces. So I was so heavily delayed because I think it was the communication system on the Hermes broke, and then something else, I had a critical communications failure. My fleet was delayed 2 days. And then when it came to the first day I could have landed, because the sitrep card came up and it was passed, it was on the 21st or beyond, I rolled 12 on the dice for the weather check, which was a storm, which means no landings can take place. So it was very, very frustrating from that standpoint that I wasn't able to land when I should have. And it, just calculates in all of the aspects of war that you can't control. But what happened was I've kind of reset these up how they were. An unbelievably strong force of Argentinians on the beaches, and the landings did not go well, frankly. And then the British took significantly heavier losses than they historically did, and it was a bad time. I did not do well in the scoring of the campaign. But I really, really enjoyed this game, and I will, because of its dice rolling, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is much more of a simulation than it is a game, because with a game there's much more, I don't know, I feel like you should be able to influence it a bit more, and with this it's really just pick where I put things and then hope for the best. There's very little to do with modifiers and putting different bits and pieces in, and trying to get the best result out. A lot of it is just a die roll. The weather means this happens. The event means this happens. You roll the die and this thing happens. The most strategic part, really, especially of the task force stuff, is where you do put your units and which units you put together. And you have this chart with all the different classes of ships. And the real important part, you have these radar lock numbers. So if there's incoming enemy aircraft, so let's say we got some daggers flying in order for, and say they're attacking this central task force, sure, why not, that's what's going on. Basically what you'll do is you pick your vessel in that zone, which has the highest radar lock number, because you always want to do that, and you're trying to roll equal to or less than, I believe. Boom. So we rolled under that number, which was a 7, because we have, let's see, well, it's all buried now. There we go. So we have the HMS Invincible in that central task force. This means he got a radar lock on the aircraft. So those daggers now can be targeted. And basically what happens is you start with the planes 30 miles out with that target lock, and then if you miss, 10 miles later you can try again, 10 miles later you can try again, 9 miles later you can try again. If you fail this target roll and you failed all these ones and there's planes left, then they do their bombing runs and they'll attack your ships. So you have plenty of opportunities to do that, but if you only have, these Type 22 class ships, you got to roll a 3 or less. You're gonna be hurting to try and even spot the mirages, and the daggers, all the various different planes that are coming at you. And once you get your target lock, okay, we're 30 miles out, so we can cross-reference this chart here. We can attempt to do a target lock, which rolls a D8. So what happens is D8. Let's roll a D8. Boom, we got a 3. So let's say we had 3 daggers. We get the target lock 3 token, wherever on earth I did with that, and we'll stick it here. So one of them's going to have a 3 on it. We roll again for the next plane, a 7. So this guy's got a 7 on him, and we'll roll again. Oh, it was a 3. So instead of getting a new target lock, he just sits on here. So then what happens is, he's the only one, the Invincible's the only one that can shoot at range 30 miles, and he rolls a D8. So I'm trying to roll a D8 to shoot all of my surface-to-air Sea Dart missiles. And if I roll a 3 or a 7, I will kill one of these stacks or abort each stack respectively. I only get 1 roll though. Wow, lucky I rolled a 7. Boop, he flies home or he's shot down. You basically just put him back in his airbase because they have unlimited planes in the game, frankly. So then what you do is, what do I do with them? Then you'd go again. So we go from that 30 miles that we showed you. We'll discard that. Now we're at the 20 mile range. Now the Invincible's already fired all of his Sea Dart missiles. So he can't do anything else, but he can still use his radar lock value to get a radar lock and communicate that to the other vessels in his zone. So we'll definitely be doing that because that 7 is very nice. Boom. So we rolled lower than that 7. Let's go and do some more shooting. So let's see what boats do we have here. We've got the Hermes and we've got the Argonaut. Let's see if we can use both of these. Each vessel in the zone can only shoot 1 time during the whole kind of round. So what we'll do is we've got, we're at range 20, so the Hermes can't even attack, so we'll put him back. And the Argonaut, his LDR class, he also can't attack at that range. I don't know if I have a CT1. I don't have any, that's hilarious. I don't have any aircraft and any vessels that can actually shoot at that range. So basically you just go on to the next round, roll 7 or less, which we do. Now we've got that target, now we've got the radar lock, which is different from the target lock. So now we'll get all these guys back. Let's see, I've got a bunch of them here. Intrepid. Let's just do these ones. So I've got Intrepid, Exeter, Argonaut, and Hermes. Let's see. And they're all different. So we have FLS. He can't do anything. He's a landing craft. My bad. T-42. So we cross-reference here. We're at the 10-mile mark. He rolls a D4 to target. So we'll do that. Roll a D4. And he rolls a 2. So we'll get the 2 target lock out. And so you can see, the smaller the numbers you roll, So this is a D4. You have more likelihood of re-rolling that number. So this guy's at D, and you choose one weapon to do that, and we've got a target lock of 1 for the second plane. And I don't know where my target lock 1 guy is. There's a lot of counters in this game, and so sometimes it gets hard to keep a track of them. So we've got 2 daggers left. He says, whatever I did with the other one, there it is. And we've got these boats are going to fire. So the HMS Exeter is going to shoot his 1d4 missiles, and we rolled a 3. So he misses both of them. He's done. He goes back here. And then we've got the Hermes. Yes, he has to roll a d8. And he's got to get a 1 or a 2 to actually do anything. So you can see he's firing less accurate missiles. So he misses completely as well. Hermes is going to go back here. And then we've got the Argonaut. And he's LDR. He's also going to roll a d8. So nothing. We did all that target lock work and we only shot down 1 plane. Because all of the vessels that are eligible to shoot have shot, we'll just hoppity skip to the last one. We're not going to worry about range 10 miles because it doesn't matter. And the daggers are now going to engage. And they have their kind of air-to-surface payloads ready. And you just put all of the counters in the task force zone, or whichever zone you're attacking, into an opaque cup. I got 2 daggers. We'll resolve 1, and he's going to attack. You just draw randomly the Baltic Ferry. And let's see, we got a dagger. Let me just make sure I do the right one. He looks very similar to the Mirage, so I'm just going to make sure I pick the right column here. He's on his bombing run. He's going to roll a d10. On a 1, he destroys the vessel. He rolled a 10, nothing happens. He flies home, has a great day. My Baltic Ferry goes back here. The second dagger goes on a bombing run, and we pull, let's see, what do we got here? The Europic Ferry, also a support vessel. So he rolls a d10. Oh, he rolls a 7, nothing happens. So, you do all that work, and a lot of the times nothing happens like that. Because hitting targets in the Atlantic Ocean from a mile away, very difficult to do. But if he rolls a 1, the support vessel is blown up, sunk, immediately removed from the game permanently, and domestic opinion is going to plummet. If that was a troop carrier, so let's say the Nordland was destroyed, whichever this little configuration tells you which troops are on which ship, the Nordland's destroyed, 40th Commando, those are destroyed as well. Permanently removed from the game. If you lose a troop vessel, your domestic opinion is going to go down even further. So it's absolutely key to protect those. But generally, that is a lot of the gist of what this game is. When you do the landings, you bring ships into these squares, and then they drop off their troops, which have to attack the units, and you get points based on how many of these spaces are British occupied, basically. How many have been cleared of Argentinian forces. So there's a lot. The game progresses over a good amount of time. You get a lot of meat in the game, and there is, especially in the kind of combat display here, there's some tactics going on, but a little bit less than I thought there would be. But I guess I'm glad it's not like a whole separate game kind of tacked on. But really, it's just if these guys do scramble, especially in the late game, they'll scramble 2 or 3 times and send wave after wave of ships. And you can only scramble so many of your Harriers. Because your Harriers, you put them on combat air patrol, they'll intercept, but once they do, they're done. They go away. Well, if they send a whole other wave, you don't have any Harriers in the air. And the Harriers on this little track down here, they go from flown, and then at the end of the turn they go to arming. And then at the end of the next turn, then they become ready. So there's this cycling of your forces, and I really love this. This is very much RAF, the Battle of Britain to me as well, where you have to cycle all your Spitfires and Hurricanes from reloading to arming and to repairing and all that stuff. They go through this cycling phase. You'd have to do that with your very limited Harrier resources. That was really cool. I really, really enjoyed that. But really, that's a lot of what the game is. So what I'll do is we'll take a little step back, and then we'll talk about just kind of the game as a whole and what we think of it. Okay, so again, this was my very first play, and I probably didn't do everything right in any way, shape, or form because the rulebook is extensive, it is dense, and it is also somewhat confusing at times or a little bit vague in areas. And whilst there's a lot of errata online, and I had a lot of the stuff printed off, you're still never going to do everything perfectly. But with that in mind, I had a really, really fun time playing this. I think it had a good balance between being quite meaty in what's a fairly serious topic. I mean, all war is very serious. I guess that's the wrong phraseology to use, but I felt like I was doing a lot, and I had some options of how things would work, but the combat, when you would get into combat, there were enough phases and sub-steps where it wasn't overly complex, but you had every opportunity to try and do what you wanted to do, and then half the time that wouldn't happen anyway. But there was some really nitty gritty. I really enjoyed the whole 30 miles away, 20 miles away, 10 miles away, those range bands, and then how your surface vessels can utilize their surface-to-air missiles in the best way. At each range band, you gamble of like, do I wait to get the better result, the better die roll, but I might mess my radar lock up, and there's some really cool decisions to make there. And then that goes again into the composition of what you put in each zone of the task force. So there's some really fun stuff there. And like I said earlier, I partly wish there was a little bit more of an odds-based combat table, just because that's what I loved about RAF Battle of Britain, is you could compose your forces in such a way that you could at least try to maximize how your forces came out of the fight. Here it's just dice rolls, right? Just trying to get a 1, and then which dice you use, that gives you those odds, but there's still just like, there's that die roll, and there is a lot of it. You chuck dice for almost everything. And so, but the aspect of the Euro gamer in me does love dice chucking, so I had a lot of fun with that. And sometimes, you've got bad weather, and instead of rolling D6s to spot the Argentinians, you've got to roll D8s, and you're like, that's, that storm at sea makes it harder to see the boats, and there's just some really neat stuff in this game. Was the first half of the game slow? Sure, it was, but it also meant you would kind of breeze through it. And then, it's there just in case anything really unlucky happens, or a lot of it is to cycle through some events to kind of set the stage of when you really get into the nitty gritty of the really heavy combat, and then into the landings. And the landings themselves are heavily abstracted into just zones and just a box. And it was this little mini game, and I guess I'm glad it wasn't a really in-depth combat game. But having done this, I really want to play a proper, a strategic game of recapturing the Falklands. I think that would be a fascinating solo game if you had an actual map of the islands and a distribution of forces. I think that would be fantastic. So it piqued my interest in finding something else as well. But as far as what this game gives you, it gives you a good, it's 6 to 8 hours of play, which is a good, healthy amount of time. You can play it over 2 or 3 nights, and it doesn't drag on too much. Or you could really bash it out in one day, and you've had a great time. It did not overstay its welcome, I didn't feel, again, because some of the turns, when nothing happens, goes fairly quickly. So it's got a good balance of that. Or if you're just getting slammed the whole time, the game is always engaging. So there's some give or take with what happens, but I don't know if I ever was playing and I was like, okay, I'm kind of bored. I never felt that way in this game. There was always something to do, or I was on a knife edge, or I was gambling. There was a few times there was a storm, and recovering your Harriers, getting them to land. If it was a storm, you roll a d6 for every Harrier you launch. On a 1, it's permanently destroyed and lost at sea. So this is a lot of gambling. If there was a storm, I'd be like, I'll not risk it. So I wouldn't launch Harriers, and then when there's a storm, you have that scramble modifier. You do +3 to the Argentinian scramble roll. Half the time they wouldn't scramble because they were worried about the same thing. But there's always, there's always this, tense aspect of, and that scramble roll was always a great roll. It was like, okay, fantastic. They kind of stood down. There was always a lot of fun things to do in the game. Sure, the game could benefit from having maybe a few little tracks instead of having like stacks of counters with the numbers and numerical things. There's some bookkeeping bits and pieces. There's an unbelievable amount of counters just lying around all over the table. But maybe I should just find a better way to organize those. But I had a blast playing this. I really did. I'm really glad I have this, and I will definitely be playing this again, and probably sooner rather than later, because it gives you a good, healthy experience. It gives you, it's not too quick and it's not too long, but it is on the longer side. So you get a lot in the box for what it's worth, in my opinion. So this was my take on Where There Is Discord, and this is by Fifth Column Games. If you can get a hold of it, I would highly recommend you do so. And if you don't like it, it's worth a lot of money. You'll be able to trade it away or sell it, no problem. And my name's Ben Alexander, and this is theplayersaid.com.